You have probably seen it on a mantelpiece. You have probably unboxed it from a plastic storage bin every December. A wooden stable, a plastic manger. It's this. What kind of power makes an empire tremble? A king sits in a palace fortress in Jerusalem. They did not pack up and leave Bethlehem after the baby was delivered. They stayed. They settled into the obscure rhythm of the village. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks bled into months. The child is growing. He is eating. He is learning the texture of the dirt and the sound of his mother's voice. The snow globe demands a crowded manger. The scripture reveals an ordinary door. The star finally stops moving. The massive Parthian entourage halts in the narrow street. The commander dismounts. They unlatch the heavy leather saddlebags containing the gold, the bitter myrrh, and the sweet frankincense. They do not walk into a cave smelling of animal breath and damp hay. They do not look for a feeding trough. They approach a different structure entirely. And the Greek text leaves two specific words hiding in plain sight that prove exactly how much time has passed. Look closely at the text in Matthew chapter 2. Verse 11. The massive diplomatic entourage dismounts in the narrow street, and the writer records exactly what they walked into. The English translations tell us they came into the house. The word Matthew actually uses in the original text is the Greek noun oikia. It is a common word, appearing over 100 times. The stone walls are thick, built to protect a paranoid ruler who has already murdered his own wife, his mother-in-law, in the New Testament. And its architectural boundaries are incredibly specific. It does not mean a temporary agricultural shelter. It does not mean a limestone cave smelling of wet animal hair, stale manure, and damp straw. It means a settled family residence, a permanent, domestic dwelling. The frantic chaos of the Roman census is over. The crowds have cleared out, and Mary and Joseph have moved out of the emergency shelter to sign a lease. They are living a quiet, domestic life, breathing the wood smoke of their own cooking fire. But the second word Matthew uses is even more disruptive to the snow globe. Look at what they actually find waiting for them inside the oikia. The English translations usually say the wise men saw the young child with Mary, his mother. But the specific Greek word Matthew chooses to identify Jesus in this moment is paidion. To understand why that matters, you have to look at the Gospel of Luke. When Luke describes the shepherds arriving on the terrifying, glorious night of the actual birth, he uses a completely different Greek word, briphos. That word means a helpless, swaddled infant, a fragile newborn whose umbilical cord has only just been cut. But Matthew's word, paidion, carries a completely different developmental weight. It is a diminutive of the root pais, which means a boy or a youth, and 3 of his own sons just to keep his throne. His name is Herod. He is a proxy king for Rome. A paidion is a toddler. They are not looking at a newborn wrapped in the bloody cloths of a chaotic birth. They are bowing down before a toddler, a child who is sitting up, a boy who is likely walking, exploring the hard earthen floor of the stone house, babbling with the first clumsy syllables of human language. When you align the Greek text with the historical geography, the timeline expands dramatically. The star did not appear over Bethlehem on the night Jesus was born to guide men who were already waiting down the street. The star appeared in the eastern sky months, perhaps over a year earlier. It took time for the Parthian council to observe the celestial anomaly. It took time to unroll the heavy parchment scrolls of Daniel, to assemble a heavily armed diplomatic caravan, and to march across hundreds of miles of hostile, wind-scorched desert territory. By the time the kingmakers of the East finally dropped to their knees and opened their chests of gold, frankincense, and bitter myrrh, Jesus has been living in Bethlehem for a long time. Adjusting this timeline might seem like a harmless piece of historical trivia that simply rearranges the wooden figures in a nativity set. But for the paranoid king sitting back in Jerusalem, this is not trivia at all. It is the exact mathematical calculation he uses to order a slaughter, clinging to power by a fragile thread. He is old, his body is failing, and he is deeply afraid of the shadows in his own court. The Parthian entourage packs their saddlebags in the dark. The chests of gold and myrrh are left behind on the hard earthen floor. The star has finished its work. An angel whispers a warning in a dream. The kingmakers mount their heavy war horses. They do not turn north toward the Roman fortress. They take another road. They vanish into the eastern desert. In the capital, a tyrant waits. Herod paces the cold limestone floor of his palace. He watches the southern road. The sun sets. The heavy iron gates close. The shadows stretch across the royal courtyard. No horses return. No intelligence is delivered. No Parthian nobles bow before his throne. The silence is deafening. He realizes he has been played. The humiliation burns. The paranoia detonates into sheer terror. A true king is breathing his air. Walking on his dirt, just 5 miles away. Herod summons the guard. He remembers the secret meeting in the shadows. He remembers the exact question he asked the Magoi. He did not ask them when the baby was delivered. He asked them when the star first appeared. He runs the brutal calculus in his head. He factors in the celestial anomaly. He calculates the months of travel across the wind-scorched desert. He factors in the developmental age of a paidion. He adds a ruthless buffer to be absolutely sure. He draws a terrifying, unmerciful line. Then, a cloud of dust rises on the eastern horizon. It is not 3 lone travelers on weary camels. It is an entourage. They breach the city limits of Bethlehem. They do not go to the caves. They do not check the feeding troughs. They go to the oikia. They kick in the wooden doors. They tear toddlers from the stone floors. The quiet night shatters. The air fills with the frantic, piercing screams of mothers. The dry dust absorbs the sharp, copper smell of young blood. An ancient prophet's poetry becomes a horrifying reality. Rachel weeps for her children. She refuses to be comforted. Most people read this slaughter as a tyrant's blind rampage. But look at the timeline. This is not a random burst of rage. It is a calculated, mathematical extermination. Herod uses the exact timeline of the paidion to ensure the true king is eradicated. He turns an obscure village into a graveyard just to protect his own crown. The boy escapes. A frantic father packs a bag in the middle of the night. A mother holds her child tight against her chest. They vanish into the Egyptian darkness before the swords ever reach their door. But the war for the throne has officially begun. The collision has drawn its first blood. And the terrifying truth about this ancient political clash is that it did not end in the 1st century. It is a massive, heavily armed diplomatic procession from the Parthian Empire, Rome's greatest military rival, riding directly into Roman territory without asking permission. A wooden manger rests on a dusty mantelpiece in your living room. You position the ceramic figures on the fake hay. You look at the baby, and it feels entirely safe. It is incredibly easy to look at the terrified, violent proxy king, pacing the cold limestone floors of his 1st century fortress, and distance yourself from his paranoia. Herod is the villain of the historical record. He is the monster who orders the iron swords to be drawn. We read the text, and we naturally assume we are the humble shepherds. Or we are the devoted kingmakers, bringing our worship to the quiet house in Bethlehem. But here's the part I keep coming back to. Herod was terrified because he understood the geopolitical reality of the Magoi far better than we do. He knew exactly what it meant when the Eastern elite parked their sweating war horses in his courtyard. He knew that if this toddler was actually the true king, then he was not. He knew his fragile reign was over. And this is the exact same collision that happens every time Jesus crosses the borders of your life. If you are in a season where the anxiety is eating you alive, where you have a white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel of your career, where you wake up with the cold sweat of a 2 a.m. panic trying to orchestrate the outcomes of your family, you are sitting on a proxy throne. You are building thick, emotional walls around your own little empire. The city streets go completely silent. You can hear the rhythmic, heavy thud of hundreds of warhorse hooves striking the stone pavement. You are calculating the threats, trying to eliminate anything that challenges your control. tasting the metallic anxiety of a ruler who knows deep down that the crown does not actually belong to him. We love the baby in the snow globe because a newborn does not ask for the keys to the fortress. A swaddled infant does not challenge how you spend your money, how you medicate your pain, or how you define your own identity. But Jesus did not stay in the manger. His arrival is not a warm holiday aesthetic. It is the hostile takeover of a dying kingdom. He rides into your territory, unannounced, and he demands the very thing you are most terrified to surrender. He demands the crown. He demands the throne. He does not come to negotiate a peace treaty with your ego. He comes to dismantle it entirely. This is why his presence always feels like a threat before it feels like a rescue. When the true king arrives, the proxy king has to surrender the room. But the detail that makes this entire invasion magnificent is not just the fact that he takes the throne away from you. It is what he actually builds on the ruins once he tears your fortress down. A star burns out in the eastern sky. A heavy wooden door closes in a quiet Judean village. You can smell the sweat of the horses and the dry dust kicking up into the Judean air. The text says that when Herod heard of their arrival, a tyrant breathes his last paranoid breath in a cold limestone fortress, his empire crumbling into dust. The ancient collision is over, but the echo of it has not stopped ringing. A star ignited in the eastern silence, and a 600-year countdown struck zero. An elite council packed their heavy saddlebags and rode directly into enemy territory. A paranoid ruler locked his fortress doors and calculated a mathematical slaughter. A wooden door opened in an obscure village, and the ultimate geopolitical threat was sitting on a dirt floor. A chest of gold unlatched before a toddler and a proxy king's reign was officially put on notice. A frantic family vanished into the Egyptian darkness and escaped the iron swords of a desperate man. A true king invaded a dying world, and the false kingdoms have been trembling ever since. One thread, one story. But here is the part I keep coming back to. It is the sheer, terrifying grace of his invasion. He does not send an army to take your throne by force. He simply arrives in the middle of your perfectly constructed life, and his mere presence exposes how incredibly tired you are of holding the scepter. Surrender is not a military defeat. He was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. He is not troubled because of a baby in a manger. It is the profound relief of a proxy king finally stepping down. You cannot keep the crown and have the peace. You have to choose who rules the house. And may the God who sent a star to guide kingmakers, who bypasses our defensive walls and walks right into our quiet rooms, give you the courage to finally lay your heavy, exhausting crown on the floor. If this shattered a snow globe for you, subscribe, leave a comment, even one word helps. Share this with someone who is exhausted from trying to rule their own life. Pray for us as we keep digging into these texts. He is troubled because a rival empire has just parked its most powerful kingmakers in his front yard. A shepherd clutching a staff, and 3 men wearing crowns, carrying tiny ornate boxes. They are always clustered together, kneeling in the hay, to understand why they are here, and why their arrival terrifies the most dangerous man in Judea. You have to start with the number. The number we have all memorized, the number we sing about every winter. But the detail that changes how you read the rest of the story is hiding in plain sight. Matthew never actually gives us one. 3 gifts are opened. Gold catches the candlelight. Frankincense burns into a thick, sweet smoke. Myrrh offers its bitter, earthy scent. 3 items, 3 boxes, 3 kings. That is the assumption. It is a neat, symmetrical equation that has shaped centuries of art. We paint 3 men on greeting cards. We carve 3 figures out of olive wood. We sing "We Three Kings" under the soft glow of street lamps. But read the 2nd chapter of Matthew. Read it in Greek. Read it in English. Read it in any translation you want. Search for the number 3. You will not find it. Matthew tells us they brought 3 kinds of gifts. He never tells us how many hands carried them. The math of the 3 kings was not recorded in the 1st century. It was engineered much later. By the 3rd century, theologians like Origen look at the 3 gifts and simply assign one man to each box. By the 6th century, a translated manuscript gives them names: Melchior, Caspar, Balthazar. They are always staring at a newborn baby on the very night he was born. Most people assume the wise men were 3 lonely kings. Suddenly, they have identities. They have crowns. They are assigned distinct ethnic backgrounds to represent the 3 known continents of the ancient Roman world. But this is not a historical record. It is a theological invention. In the Eastern Church, the early Syrian traditions do not say 3. They say 12. 12 wise men. 12 nobles riding across the harsh, wind-swept desert sands. If we strip away the Christmas carols, if we scrape off the centuries of paint from the canvas, the biblical text leaves us with a blank space, a plural noun: wise men from the East. It could have been 2. It could have been 40. But a massive diplomatic entourage arriving in Jerusalem makes infinitely more sense of the historical reality than 3 guys on camels asking for directions. 3 men wandering into the capital of a paranoid, violent monarch like Herod do not cause the entire city to tremble. 3 foreigners knocking on the palace gates do not shut down the markets. 3 men are a curiosity. 3 men are a blip on the Roman radar. This was not a blip. This was an earthquake. Rome and the Parthian Empire were the 2 great superpowers of the ancient world. They had fought brutal, bloody wars over the territory of Judea only a few decades earlier. Parthian forces had actually invaded Jerusalem, deposed the Roman-backed ruler, and installed their own guy. Herod eventually took the city back. But the fear of a Parthian return haunted him, who showed up at the manger while the angels were still singing in the fields. We put them in snow globes, until the day his failing body finally died. So, when a delegation from the east arrives in his city, unannounced, asking about a newborn king of the Jews, Herod's blood runs cold. Jerusalem panicked because they knew exactly who these men were. They recognized the style of the robes. They recognized the breeding of the war horses. They recognized the political threat riding through their gates. Because these men were not kings. They were the men who made kings. A thick cloud of red dust rolls over the crest of the Mount of Olives. The Roman guards, stationed on the eastern wall of Jerusalem, tighten their grip on their iron spears, watching the road below. They do not see 3 lonely scholars seeking a manger. They see a military-grade cavalry. These are the Parthian elite. They ride with heavily armed escorts. The war horses, sweating under the midday Judean sun, their bridles clinking in a steady rhythm, the air thick with the smell of worn leather and desert wind. In the Parthian Empire, which stretches wide and formidable directly to the east of Rome's territories, a ruler does not simply take the throne by birthright or military coup alone. A king must be legitimized by a very specific, fiercely powerful caste of men. They are a dual threat of religion and statecraft. They serve as the highest-ranking priests, the chief political advisors. We dress children in bathrobes and cardboard crowns to sing about them in church auditoriums. We frame their arrival as a quiet, magical moment, the master astronomers, and the ultimate kingmakers of the Parthian court. When a monarch dies in the east, these men convene in the shadow of the palace. They study the shifting political winds. They calculate the movements of the stars, and they alone possess the authority to decide who officially wears the crown. They are not wandering philosophers. They are geopolitical heavyweights. And now, this elite council rides directly into the Roman province of Judea. They bypass the outer Roman garrisons. They march straight up the stone steps of the palace belonging to Herod the Great, a man who sits on the throne of Judea for one reason only. Rome put him there as a buffer to keep the Parthian Empire out. The dust finally settles in the royal courtyard. The delegation dismounts, their robes heavy with the grime of a massive journey. They stand before Herod, breathing the cool air of his fortress. And they do not offer diplomatic pleasantries, own family to protect his crown. And they ask a question that is the ancient equivalent of a declaration of war, of gift-giving in the cold winter air. But if you look closer at the text The historical reality is entirely different. Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose, and have come to worship him. This is not a polite theological inquiry. It is a terrifying political challenge to Herod's ears. They are saying, we, the men who install kings in the rival empire, have seen the signs that your replacement has been born, and we are here to pledge our allegiance to him. Herod realizes immediately that his fragile dynasty is standing on the edge of a blade. But to understand exactly what kind of men carry this much terrifying authority, you have to look at the specific Greek word Matthew uses to identify them. Matthew opens his second chapter. The visitors stand in Jerusalem. They ask for the king. The English Bibles translate their title as wise men. But the word Matthew actually writes in the original text is the plural Greek noun Magoi. It is a loan word. It comes directly from Old Persian. It refers to the magus, a hereditary caste of priests. They study the stars. They interpret dreams. They wield immense political authority in the East. They are the ancient world's intelligence agency. Look at the book of Daniel. 600 years earlier, a Hebrew exile sits in Babylon. The Babylonian Empire falls. When you look at the geopolitical climate of the first century, at the original language Matthew uses to describe them, the Medo-Persian Empire rises. Daniel survives the brutal transition. The Persian king actually appoints Daniel chief over the Royal Advisory Council, over the astrologers, over the enchanters, over the magi. Daniel saves their lives from a paranoid king's execution order. He teaches them. He shares the ancient Hebrew texts. He records the timeline of the coming Messiah. He leaves a theological fingerprint on the Eastern Empire, a fingerprint that waits in the dark. For 6 centuries, they wait. They watch the skies. Then, a specific celestial anomaly appears. The cosmic clock strikes. The descendants of Daniel's council see the signal. They strap provisions to the leather saddles. They march west. This history changes everything about how Matthew chapter 2 unfolds. The Magoi are not 3 gentle philosophers carrying holiday gifts. They are an elite political strike force, acting on a 600-year-old prophetic countdown. If realizing this quaint nativity scene is actually a geopolitical thriller is changing how you read the text, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe, because every week we go deeper into the text than you knew was possible. So Herod calls a secret meeting. He locks the heavy wooden doors. He summons the scribes. He gathers the chief priests. He breathes the stale air of the palace and demands an answer. Where is this Messiah supposed to be born? The scholars unroll the stiff parchment. At the timeline of a tyrant's paranoia, you start to see a narrative that shatters the snow globe completely. Their fingers trace the black Hebrew ink. They find the prophet Micah. They point to the exact location, Bethlehem, a dusty, insignificant outpost just 5 miles south. Herod smiles. He pulls the Magoi aside into the shadows of the court. He lies to them. He tells them to go find the boy. He asks them to report back. He promises he wants to worship the new king too. His hands are already covered in blood, and he is already calculating the murder. The Magoi leave the fortress. They ride south into the cold Judean night. They follow the star. But the scene waiting for them at the end of the road shatters another massive illusion, because the destination they finally arrive at is not the place we sing about. The heavy war horses walk the 5 miles south. The paranoid tension of Jerusalem is left behind in the dark. The star burns a white hole in the black Judean canopy, leading the eastern kingmakers down the rocky ridge toward Bethlehem. The night air is biting and still. You can hear the rhythmic crunch of iron horseshoes on the hardened dirt. You can smell the faint, lingering wood smoke drifting from the stone hearths of a sleeping town. This is not a quaint holiday aesthetic. It is a geopolitical collision. The real question of this story isn't, how did they follow a star? But the scene waiting in the quiet dark is entirely devoid of the magic we usually paint on the canvas. The sky is not split open by a terrifying, glorious choir. The angels have already folded their light and vanished from the atmosphere. The fields are not empty. The shepherds have already returned to their flocks, on the shivering hillsides. The streets are not overflowing with exhausted travelers. The chaotic, desperate crush of the Roman census has already faded into memory. We love to compress the timeline. We want all the cast members on the stage at exactly the same time. We want the shepherds kneeling next to the Magoi, the angels hovering over the stable, the stars shining perfectly over a wooden manger. But time has moved forward. The umbilical cord has healed. The 40 days of purification rites in the Jerusalem temple are completely finished. The frantic, terrifying search for an empty guest room is now just a story Mary tells in the past tense. A carpenter from Nazareth is quietly figuring out how to raise a boy in a town that is not his own. This is not the breathless, chaotic night of a newborn's arrival. It is the quiet, hidden aftermath of a family trying to survive. They do not bring greetings from their emperor. Instead, they look at a paranoid, violent man who has murdered his 2 years old and under. The royal order is given. The military boots march south. The iron swords are drawn from their leather sheaths.